This week's Torah portion, Vayishlach, Jacob returns to the land of Israel after a sojourn of 20 years abroad. When he left, he was a young man fleeing his twin brother, Esau, who wanted to kill him because Jacob tricked him out of their father's blessing. Jacob was alone with nothing but the clothes on his back. And now, 20 years later, he was a husband and a father to 12 children, soon to be 13, and was wealthy beyond measure. On the borders of the land of Israel, Jacob hears that his brother Esau is massing what Jacob believes to be an army to fight him so that he can finally take his revenge that was owed to him all these years. And Jacob did what he thought he could do to come out of this confrontation alive. He sent messengers to Esau. He sent him gifts and tokens of peace. And the night before the fatal confrontation, the Bible tells us that Jacob took his 2 wives, his 2 handmaids, and his children, and he crossed the Yabok River. Apparently, Jacob wanted to divide and scatter his family so that if Esau attacked, some of them would have a better chance of surviving. And the Bible tells us, Vayikachem, Vaya'avirem et hanachal, Vaya'aver et asher lo. And Jacob took his family and crossed over the river with them, along with all his possessions, et asher lo, everything that he owned. And the next verse tells us, Vayivater Yaakov levado. And Jacob was alone. This was the moment when he was alone, that he confronted the strange man, some kind of heavenly messenger with whom he wrestled through the night and who ultimately blessed Jacob, changing his name to Israel. But the rabbis ask this question. If Jacob had succeeded in accompanying his entire family across the river and his entire flock, and et kol asher lo, and all of his possessions, all of his stuff, everything he owned, if they were all successfully transported to the other side, how did he find himself all alone? Wasn't he with everyone else? Commentators suggest that once everyone had crossed and that no one was left, Jacob crossed back again, alone. Why? What possible reason could there be? Once everyone had crossed the river and all of the possessions had been transported, why would Jacob figure that he had to cross again to the other side alone? Some commentators suggest that he just wanted to take another look around to see that nothing had been forgotten. We do that. I do that. My wife teases me about it. When we're about to leave town, we lock the door and call the elevator, but inevitably I unlock the door, open the house, take one look around to see that all the lights are off, the gas is shut, the windows are closed. Other commentators suggest that Jacob crossed back to the other side as a diversion to escape Esau. If necessary, he could flee in another direction. But the most interesting comment is suggested by Rabbi Eliezer in the Talmud. He went back to retrieve small jars that he had forgotten. Why would he go back for small jars? What reason could he have to risk his life to retrieve these small pitchers? Why were they important? What was in them? Anybody? Some commentators suggest that they contained small amounts of purified oil, the very oil that was found by the Maccabees over 1.5 millennia later. It's a nice comment, because this parsha often falls on or around Hanukkah. And by this, the commentator suggests that the deeds of one generation impact on the deeds of future generations. Even thousands of years later, we are all linked, and by our deeds, we merit the generations to come. Other commentators suggest that these were little jars to carry water, and that Jacob returned for them for the sake of his young children who might otherwise suffer from thirst on the long journey. We do that. I do that. We think that our children are going to need something on a long trip. We often go back to retrieve it. When our daughter was very young, we would travel with her around Europe. We'd just throw her in the back seat of the car and drive around for 2 weeks, take her with us everywhere. And until she was around 7 or 8 years old, she was attached to this pink blanket that she dragged around with her wherever she went. She probably thought it was a real person because she named it Bobby. So we were in Paris and about to leave for the airport to fly back to New York. We left the hotel room and called the elevator. I unlocked the door again just to take one last look around. Didn't see anything, and we left. We were already inside the airport complex when our daughter began to mumble, "Bobby." And that soon crescendoed into whatever the child equivalent is to "the earth is coming to an end." Somehow we had forgotten our blanket in the hotel. And I did something I never do. I turned around and returned all the way to Paris to retrieve the blanket. My daughter needed it for the long journey, so I went to retrieve it. I wouldn't have done it for myself, and probably not for my wife. I say probably. You never know. But for my daughter, she needed her Bobby. But the most interesting comment is again from the Talmud. Rabbi Eliezer suggests that these jars didn't have any particular use at all, or any monetary value at all. For him, the most important consideration was that they belonged to Jacob. They were his possessions. And since they were his, and he forgot them, he returned to retrieve them, even at the risk of his own safety. And Eliezer then draws the following rather baffling lesson. We learn from this, he says, that the righteous value their possessions, even at the risk of their physical safety, because they detest theft. The sage draws a connection between our possessions, our stuff, and theft, because there are two ways to acquire possessions, either honestly or dishonestly. Since Jacob acquired these little jars honestly, he didn't steal them. He earned them through hard and creative work. They were valuable to him beyond their insurance value, which was negligible. For Jacob, these jars had a story behind them. They constituted 20 years of honest labor. They represented 20 years of building a family, renewing his life, and forging his future. They represented years when his personality was transformed from being somewhat shady, acquiring things deviously and dishonestly. That's why Esau wanted to kill him. To becoming a person of integrity, who became wealthy through honest means. When we acquire stuff, things, when we take possession of a material item, it may mean more to us than its insurance value or the financial worth of its material components. A Picasso might mean nothing more to us than its insurance replacement value, an investment. But an amateur painting created just for us, by one whom we love, or acquired and given to us just for us, by one whom we love, could be of greater value to us than a Picasso. And if our apartment was on fire, we might still go in and retrieve it, even at personal risk. If it meant that much to us, we might risk our own safety for that picture album documenting our family's history, even though the material value of the pictures themselves are negligible and they're nothing. Jewish history is filled with stories of Jews rushing into burning synagogues to save a Torah from destruction. What is a Torah? Parchment and ink. How much are these raw materials really worth? But that's not the point. The point is the meaning we invest in these material items. Judaism teaches us to sanctify the world, that even mundane things can be vested with deep meaning. The entire world and all that was created could be sanctified. We are taught in Judaism to distinguish between the holy and the unholy, between the 6 days of the week and the holiness of Shabbat. There is nothing wrong with unsacred things. There's nothing wrong with unsacred stuff. They're just not sacred. But we can vest unsacred items with sanctity. A parchment, animal skin, and ink can become a Torah. A canvas and oil can become a masterpiece. A mere blanket of yarn can become my Bobby. Something a child needs. And in her eyes and in the eyes of her parents represents their love and responsibility towards her. In our world of rampant materialism and mad pursuit of things, where we so often take the measure of a person based on their possessions, how much stuff do they have? It's important to remember Jewish values. First, Judaism does not discourage material wealth. Actually, to the contrary. We are commanded to take pleasure in the world and to delight in the beneficence of God's universe. The rabbis warn that we will be called to account for all of the legitimate pleasures that we have denied ourselves. Jews are not attracted to poverty. Poverty is not a virtue. We do not take oaths of poverty. There is nothing inherently noble in poverty. A poor person is not necessarily honorable, and an honorable person is not necessarily poor. But what Rabbi Eliezer reminds us of is that our possessions must be acquired honestly. The righteous despise theft, and that includes white-collar theft as well. The sages proclaim to rob a person even of the value of a penny is like taking his life. You must produce your wealth through honest means. You can't steal, even to give to the less fortunate. Robin Hood wasn't a Jew. We are prohibited taking what is not ours for any purpose. And second, we should remember that sometimes the least expensive of our possessions is what is most valuable to us. And in this way, the material things of the world become sanctified. It was only because Jacob returned for those small jars of no financial value whatsoever, but of enormous emotional and even spiritual value to him, because they represented honesty, integrity, hard work, 20 years of his life. It was only because he returned for them that he found himself alone, and that he happened upon the heavenly messenger who would seal his destiny with greatness. And in this, the small jars became the link, the bridge between Jacob's former life of shady dealings and his future life of becoming the greatest patriarch of them all. Amen.